The moment it happened, 300 people stopped breathing. A man worth $4 billion walked past the mayor's chief of staff, walked past the dean of the most prestigious architecture school in the country, walked past journalists, investors, socialites, and every single person in that ballroom who had spent the entire evening trying to get 30 seconds of his attention. He walked past all of them like they were furniture, and he stopped in front of her. She stood near the far wall, away from the spotlight, away from the champagne towers and the crystal award glittering under the chandeliers. She wore emerald green, not the kind of dress designed to beg for attention, but the kind that earned it without trying. Her locks were pulled into a loose crown threaded with silver rings. Her posture was still, patient, like a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment for 6 years and refused to flinch now that it had arrived. The billionaire, Rafael Montero, took her hand, and in front of every camera, every guest, every pair of wide, disbelieving eyes in that room, he raised it to his lips and kissed it. Not quickly, not casually, reverently, like her hand had built something sacred and he wanted the world to know it. 10 feet away, Victor Ashcroft, the man being honored tonight, the man whose name was etched on that crystal award, the man whose new wife stood frozen at his elbow in ivory silk, watched the whole thing happen, and for the first time in his perfectly curated life, he couldn't control the narrative. Because the woman Rafael Montero had just kissed, that was Victor's ex-wife, the woman he'd erased, the woman whose genius he'd stolen and repackaged as his own, the woman whose name he'd scraped off patents and press releases and award nominations until the world forgot she ever existed. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever given someone the very best of yourself? Your mind, your sweat, your sleepless nights, your brilliance, only to watch them stamp their name on it and act like you were never in the room? Have you ever been invisible inside your own creation? Hold that feeling, because tonight, a woman who was erased is about to be remembered. And the man who erased her, he's about to discover that some debts don't expire, they compound. But before you understand why a billionaire kissed this woman's hand in front of 300 witnesses, you need to understand what was taken from her. You need to understand the love, the betrayal, and the 4 sentences buried inside a divorce document that nobody thought would ever matter. This story is going to take turns you will not see coming. If you believe that the truth always finds its way to the surface, drop a like right now, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into it. It started 6 years ago in a place that smelled like burnt wiring and blind faith. The studio wasn't really a studio. It was a converted storage unit on the 3rd floor of a decaying industrial building in a part of the city that real estate agents described as emerging, which was a polite way of saying nobody with options would choose to be there. Victor Ashcroft and Amara Delaney had pushed 2 salvage desks together and called it headquarters. The radiator in the corner clanked and screamed like a trapped animal. The only natural light came through a window so coated in grime that noon looked like dusk. There was one printer, one coffee maker that worked about 60% of the time, and $4,000 left in a joint account that shrank every time the landlord remembered they existed. They were married. They were partners. They were broke. And on the night, everything almost ended and almost began. Victor sat at his desk with his head in his hands, staring at a laptop screen full of rejection emails. This isn't going to work. He said it to the ceiling, to the walls, to the universe that had apparently decided their dream wasn't worth funding. 11 clients, Amara. 11. We've pitched every community development board, every green housing initiative, every foundation with a sustainability mandate in this city. Nobody wants what we're offering. We're 2 unknowns with a lease we can't afford and a portfolio nobody will look at twice. Amara didn't respond right away. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her desk, surrounded by sketches and open textbooks and printed research papers covered in her handwriting. She hadn't been designing buildings. She'd been studying something else entirely: mycorrhizal networks, the vast, invisible root systems beneath forests where fungal threads carry nutrients and chemical signals between trees. Communication without language, adaptation without instruction, intelligence without a brain. She'd been studying the way living things respond to their environment, not by resisting it, but by integrating with it. And somewhere in the last 72 sleepless hours, something had clicked into place in her mind that she couldn't yet fully articulate, but she could feel it. Like hearing a melody before the lyrics arrive. What if the building wasn't static? She said quietly. Victor looked up. What? What if the structure itself could respond? Not just insulation panels and ventilation systems. I'm talking about integrated bioresponsive membranes, walls that breathe, Facades that shift opacity based on temperature differentials. Load-bearing systems that redistribute stress in real time, the way a skeleton adapts to weight. She turned her sketchpad toward him. And even in the dim, ugly light of that dying studio, Victor saw it. Not just an idea, a revolution. Her drawings didn't look like blueprints. They looked like organisms. Structures that seemed to pulse with life, buildings that belonged to the earth rather than sitting on top of it. Walls embedded with organic polymers that would cool themselves in heat and insulate in cold. Facades that harvested moisture from humidity. Rooftop membranes that converted thermal energy into power. Nobody had ever done anything like this. Nobody had even come close. Amara. His voice was barely a whisper. This is extraordinary. She'd almost smiled. You think it could work? I think it could change everything. He kissed her then. Not with hunger or desperation, with wonder. Like he'd stumbled across something holy in the dark. And in that moment, that's exactly what they were to each other. Two people standing at the edge of something enormous, holding hands, absolutely certain they were about to change the world. Amara spent the next 9 months building what she called a meridian system. 9 months of obsessive, relentless, beautiful work. She tested polymer compounds until her eyes burned. She wrote algorithms for thermal response patterning that no computer scientist in the country could have replicated. She developed living wall integration frameworks, bioadaptive stress distribution models, and predictive environmental response systems, each one more elegant than the last. Victor handled the business side. He built the pitch decks. He scheduled the meetings. He designed the brand identity. And every night, he'd come home to find Amara still hunched over her desk, ink-stained fingers moving across paper like she was composing a symphony only she could hear. You need to sleep, he'd say. I will, she'd answer. After I solved the humidity coefficient problem, she always solved it. She always solved everything. They were a team. That's what she believed. His voice, her vision. His presentation, her substance. Two halves of something whole. They were building the future. They just didn't agree on whose name it would carry. The first real opportunity came from the Hargrove Foundation, a well-funded nonprofit looking for a revolutionary design for a community wellness center. Green architecture, adaptive systems, cutting-edge sustainability. It was everything the Meridian system was built for. Backstage at the presentation venue, Amara straightened Victor's collar. She always did this before important meetings. It was their ritual, a small, intimate gesture that steadied them both. Her hands on his lapels, his breath slowing, the silent agreement that they were in this together. Ready? She asked. We're ready, he said. She squeezed his hand. He walked toward the stage, and Amara moved to the doorway, expecting to be called in after the opening, the way they'd discussed, the way they'd rehearsed. But the call never came. Good afternoon, I'm Victor Ashcroft, and I'm here to show you what architecture can become. When we stop building against nature and start building with it. Amara stood in that doorway and watched her husband present her life's work to a room full of decision-makers, and never once mention her name. Her bioresponsive membranes became his innovation. Her 9 months of research became his vision. Her algorithms, her polymer frameworks, her living wall systems, all of it flowed from his mouth with the confident ease of a man who genuinely believed the words belonged to him. And the board ate it up. They leaned forward in their chairs. They nodded. They smiled. They shook his hand afterward, one by one, like they were touching the future. Nobody asked about the woman standing in the doorway with cold hands and a cracking heart. Afterward, she found him in the parking lot. He was still buzzing, tie loosened, energy radiating off him like heat from sun-baked concrete. They loved it, Amara. They actually loved it. We might actually get this. They loved it, she repeated. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Flat, distant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Why didn't you bring me in? I was going to. But the energy in the room, it was electric. I couldn't break the momentum. You understand? You said I developed. You said my framework. You said my breakthrough, Victor. It's just language. Presentation. These people want a face, a brand, one name they can attach their confidence to. That's how funding works. And that name is yours. He took her hands, looked into her eyes with the same warmth that had made her fall in love with him 3 years earlier. For now, this is strategy, Amara, not betrayal. Once the firm has weight, once we're established, I'll make sure the world knows exactly who built what. I promise you. She wanted to believe him. And because she loved him, because love makes you negotiate with truths you should never accept, she did. But the pattern didn't correct itself. It hardened. It calcified. It became permanent. Magazine profiles appeared. Victor Ashcroft, the visionary architect redefining sustainable design. Amara was mentioned in passing, his talented wife who assists with technical development, not the creator, not the inventor, the assistant, the helper, the woman behind the man behind the curtain. Award nominations arrived, addressed only to him. Industry panels requested his presence, never hers. Board presentations featured her innovations repackaged as his strategic decisions. Press interviews turned her sleepless nights into his singular genius. And every time she raised it, every time she pressed the wound, Victor had the same answer. It's positioning, it's branding, it's how this industry works. Trust me, trust me. 2 words that slowly became the most dangerous phrase in her vocabulary. And then came the patent. She found it on a Tuesday morning. The document was sitting on their shared office printer, still warm. She picked it up and read it standing in the pale gray light of a studio that her work had paid for, in a building her designs had made possible. The Meridian System, filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Primary inventor, Victor Ashcroft. Company, Ashcroft Design Collective. Her name, Amara Delaney, appeared nowhere. Not as co-inventor, not as contributor. Nowhere, as if she had never existed. She sat down with the document in her lap. Outside, rain tracked down the windows. On a shelf above Victor's desk, the industry award he'd won for her system gleamed under the overhead light. In the drawer beneath it, her original sketches gathered dust. She sat there for a very long time, and somewhere in the silence of that studio, between the sound of rain and the ghost of a radiator that used to scream, Amara Delaney stopped being a wife who wanted to believe. She became a woman who finally saw clearly. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever given someone the best of yourself, your ideas, your labor, your trust, only to discover that they were never planning to share the stage with you? That the whole time you thought you were building something together, they were building something on top of you? Hold that feeling. Because what Amara does next is something most people wouldn't have the patience or the precision to pull off. Victor came home that evening in a good mood. He'd had lunch with a potential client. Big project, government adjacent, the kind of contract that could triple their revenue overnight. He dropped his keys on the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and noticed Amara sitting at the kitchen table in the same position she'd been in for hours. She slid the patent filing across the table. Explain this. He barely glanced at it. It's standard procedure. The company holds the IP. I'm listed as primary inventor because I'm managing principal and CEO. It's how corporate patents work. I created that system, Victor, and the firm will compensate you fairly. This is business, Amara. This is how we protect what we've built. What we've built. She looked at him, really looked at him. The way you look at a building whose foundation you suddenly realize was never level. That's not what you mean, is it? You mean what you've built. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being ours and became yours. And you didn't even have the decency to tell me when it happened. You're overreacting. I want a divorce. The word landed in that kitchen like a stone thrown through glass. It didn't echo. It shattered. Victor set down his water. His face moved through stages, amusement, confusion, irritation, and then deep beneath all of it, something that looked like fear. You don't mean that? I have never meant anything more clearly in my entire life. Amara, listen to me. We can work through this. Couples go through rough patches. We'll get counseling. We'll restructure the credit arrangements. You filed a patent on my life's work under your name alone. There is no credit arrangement that fixes that. There is no counseling that rebuilds that kind of trust. I want out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She spoke with the same precision she brought to every algorithm she'd ever written. Clean, exact, and final. If you've ever had to walk away from something you built because someone refused to give you what you deserved, type "I know that feeling" in the comments right now. And if this story is hitting different, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happens next? This is where the whole game changes. The divorce proceedings were swift and surgical. Amara's attorney, a kind woman with tired eyes and a realistic worldview, laid out the situation in terms that left no room for hope. You won't get much, she said gently. The patents are filed under the company. Your contributions are documented internally, but they're legally classified as work product created during employment. We can fight it, but it will cost more than you'll ever recover, and it could take years. Amara sat across the desk and absorbed this the way she absorbed every problem, quietly, completely, without flinching. So I walk away with nothing, essentially. I'm sorry. Most people in that moment would have fought, would have hired a bigger attorney, would have gone to the press, would have screamed and raged and burned everything down. Amara didn't do any of those things. She did something far more dangerous. She agreed to sign the settlement. Every page, every clause. She didn't contest the asset division. She didn't fight for the patents. She didn't demand public acknowledgement. But before she signed, she wrote something. 4 sentences, buried deep in Article 9, subsection D, wrapped in the kind of dense, suffocating legal language that makes even experienced attorneys' eyes glaze over and skip to the next page. Listen to this carefully. In acknowledgement of proprietary systems, methodologies, and intellectual property conceived and developed by a Delaney during the period of marriage and professional partnership, a contingent equity share of 22% shall be activated upon the occurrence of any qualifying capital event, including but not limited to acquisition, institutional investment exceeding $75 million or strategic merger involving technologies derived from or dependent upon the aforementioned intellectual property. 22% of everything triggered automatically the moment anyone invested more than $75 million in the company her work had built. Victor's legal team reviewed the settlement. They saw the clause, and they shrugged. At the time, Ashcroft Design Collective was a small firm running on reputation and fumes. It was worth a fraction of what it would become. The idea that anyone would invest $75 million in it was laughable. The clause was meaningless. A throwaway paragraph in a document full of throwaway paragraphs. They signed. Victor signed. The divorce was finalized. And Amara Delaney walked out of that attorney's office, carrying nothing but her name and a ticking clock disguised as a footnote. Over the next 6 years, Victor's firm exploded. The Meridian system, her system, became the most talked about innovation in global architecture. The Solaris Tower in Dubai, the breathing facades of the Green Home Complex in Copenhagen, the self-cooling hospitals in sub-Saharan Africa. Victor's face appeared on magazine covers. His name topped Innovator of the Year lists. He remarried, Genevieve, elegant and polished, the perfect accessory for a man who'd learned to treat people as accessories. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment across the city, Amara Delaney waited. Not because she was passive, not because she had given up, because she was precise, because she understood something that Victor never had, that time doesn't erase truth. It reveals it. And the bigger the lie becomes, the louder the truth sounds when it finally speaks. The Meridian Ballroom. Even the name was stolen. Victor had named his firm's signature event space after the system Amara created, and the irony was so thick you could choke on it. 300 guests filled the gleaming hall. Architects, investors, city officials, journalists, society figures. Chandeliers scattered golden light across champagne flutes and designer gowns. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable in the corner. Tonight was Victor Ashcroft's night. The Architecture Council's Lifetime Innovation Award. His name engraved on crystal. His speech rehearsed to the syllable. Genevieve at his side in ivory silk, her hand draped through his arm like a silk ribbon on a gift-wrapped lie. He stood on the second-floor mezzanine, giving an interview to a journalist who was recording every word of his practiced humility. Innovation isn't about ego, Victor was saying, his voice smooth as poured concrete. It's about seeing what others can't and having the courage to build it. He believed every word. That was the terrifying part. He'd told the lie so many times for so many years that it had become his truth. He no longer remembered the studio apartment. He no longer remembered the sketchpad turned toward him in dim light. He no longer remembered the woman who showed him the future and asked for nothing but partnership in return. Or maybe he did remember. Maybe that's why his champagne stopped halfway to his lips the moment he saw her. Amara Delaney. She entered through the arched doorway at the far end of the ballroom, backlit by the amber glow of the foyer. Emerald dress, silver-ringed locks, moving through the crowd with a kind of stillness that made everything around her look hurried and loud. She didn't rush. She didn't scan the room for familiar faces. She moved like a woman who knew exactly where she was going and had known for a very long time. She didn't look up at him. That's what shook him. Not her presence, but her indifference, as if he were not the center of this room, as if he had never been the center of anything. Her eyes were fixed on someone else, and when Victor followed her gaze, his chest tightened around a breath he couldn't release. Rafael Montero, the name alone could rearrange skylines. A real estate titan with holdings across 4 continents, whose single signature could greenlight a $100 million development or kill one before breakfast. For the past year, Rafael had been circling Ashcroft Design Collective with quiet, unreadable interest, attending industry panels, requesting private portfolio reviews, sending intermediaries who asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like forensic accounting. He had never committed, never revealed his hand, never explained what he actually wanted. Until tonight. Now Rafael was moving, past the mayor's chief of staff, past the dean who'd just given a toast, past the cluster of partners from Victor's own firm who straightened their spines as he passed. He moved through that crowd like a man who'd already bought the room and was simply deciding what to keep. He stopped directly in front of Amara and smiled the way a man smiles when he has finally found the answer to a question that has been haunting him for months. "Miss Delaney." His voice was warm and low, textured like aged wood. "I've waited a long time for this introduction." Amara studied him, not with suspicion, with recognition, as if she'd been expecting him too. "You know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are. That's why I'm here tonight. Not for the award ceremony, not for the champagne. For you." He didn't say it with flattery. He said it with the weight of someone who had done his research and arrived at a conclusion that changed everything. 6 months ago, he continued, my team began analyzing the bioadaptive systems in the Solaris Tower, the polymer integration, the thermal response patterning, the living wall algorithms. We were evaluating a major partnership with Ashcroft Design Collective, a 14-building development across Southeast Asia, $82 million. But something didn't add up. What didn't add up? Victor Ashcroft. Rafael paused, choosing his words like a man selecting tools. His mind is competent, strategic, commercial. But the Meridian system isn't commercial thinking. It's poetic, it's organic. It thinks the way forests think. The math was too elegant, too intuitive for his profile. And then we found the original development files. Amara's breath caught, but her expression stayed level. 6 years of practice. Your name was on every page, Rafael said quietly. Every schematic, every algorithm, every compound formulation, before someone did a rather sloppy job of scrubbing it from the records. And what did you conclude? That the most important architect of this generation has been invisible for 6 years, and that the man standing on that mezzanine with a crystal award built his entire empire on work that wasn't his. A silence stretched between them, not empty, but full. The kind of silence that holds years of patience and vindication inside it. I also found something else, Rafael said, lowering his voice. A clause. Article 9, subsection D. Contingent equity of 22% activated by any institutional investment exceeding $75 million. Amara's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. And did you trigger it? 4 days ago, Series B institutional investment. $82 million. The paperwork clears at midnight tonight. He let that sit. Let the weight of it settle. You've been waiting for this, he said. Not a question. I've been building toward this, Amara corrected. There's a difference. Behind them, footsteps. Fast. Urgent. Victor was descending the mezzanine stairs, Genevieve trailing, his face a careful mask of professional warmth, stretched over something that was beginning to crack. Rafael. His voice was too bright, too projected. A chandelier swinging in a rising wind. I had no idea you'd be here tonight. What an honor, truly. Have you had a chance to? I came to meet your ex-wife. Rafael said it without turning around. I make it a point to identify the real architects behind the buildings I invest in. Not the names on the letterhead. The minds behind the walls. Victor's smile held, but his eyes went empty. Amara was certainly an important part of the early team. Amara was the early team. Rafael's correction was gentle and absolute, like a door closing. Not slammed, just locked. The Meridian system bears her intellectual DNA in every molecule, every polymer, every algorithm, every thermal response pattern. You must know this, Mr. Ashcroft. You lived with her while she built it. Genevieve appeared at Victor's arm. Victor? What's going on? Nothing, sweetheart. Just a business conversation, but his jaw was tight. His hands were fists at his sides. The mask was slipping, and the room was starting to notice. Amara, Victor's voice dropped to something low and urgent. Can we talk? Privately, please. Why? The word was so simple, so complete. It hung in the air between them like a closed door. We signed papers, Victor. Everything that needed to be said was written in a document you reviewed, approved, and signed 6 years ago. There's nothing left to discuss in private. Whatever Raphael has told you, whatever he thinks he's found, he hasn't told me anything I didn't already know. She stepped closer, not aggressively, calmly, the way she'd once stepped to her whiteboard to explain a concept to an investor, with absolute command of the material. I wrote the Meridian system, Victor. Every algorithm, every polymer compound, every bioresponsive membrane, every line of code that made your towers breathe and your facades adapt and your buildings win awards. I wrote it in a studio where the radiators screamed and the light barely came through the window. I wrote it at 3 a.m. while you slept. I wrote it because I believed we were building something together. Her voice didn't waver. It didn't rise. It stayed level, steady, precise, and that's what made it devastating. You took my work, then you took my name off it, then you took another woman to the ceremonies where they celebrated it, and when that wasn't enough, you named this ballroom after the system I invented, and held a party in it without ever once acknowledging who gave it to you. The terrace had gone quiet. Conversations were dying in widening circles, like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. Heads were turning, phones were lowering. 300 people, sensing that the evening had shifted from celebration to reckoning. That's not fair, Victor whispered. His composure was fracturing along every seam now. The firm needed a clear brand, a unified narrative. The firm needed my engine. Amara's voice carried now, not because she raised it, but because every other sound in the room had stopped. Everything else was theater. The brand, the narrative, the magazine covers, the awards, theater, Victor, built on a stage I designed. If you believe that stolen credit always comes back to find its rightful owner, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because what happens next? Nobody in that room saw it coming. Nobody. Raphael checked his watch. The gesture was precise, unhurried, almost choreographed. We should proceed, he said. The evening has a schedule to keep. Proceed with what? Victor's voice broke open. The composure was gone. Raw desperation leaked through like water through a cracked foundation. What is this? What are you doing? Raphael didn't answer him. He turned to Amara, and in front of 300 people, in front of cameras and journalists and the entire architecture establishment, he took her hand. Slowly, deliberately, with the care of a man handling something precious and long overdue, he raised it to his lips, and he kissed it. The room held its breath. Every single person frozen in place. The string quartet had stopped playing. The bartenders stood motionless. 300 people watched a billionaire bow, not to power, not to money, not to status, but to truth. To the woman who had been erased and never stopped existing. It wasn't performative. It wasn't theatrical. It was reverence. A public, unmistakable act of recognition from a man who understood exactly what had been stolen and exactly what it was worth. Miss Delaney, Raphael said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Would you allow me the honor of introducing you properly? Amara's eyes glistened, but her chin didn't tremble. She nodded. They turned and walked together toward the stage where the podium had been quietly prepared, where the screens on the walls had been reprogrammed, where the crystal award and the birthday cake had been moved aside to make room for something far more important than celebration. The truth. The screens flickered to life, and what they showed drained every remaining shade of color from Victor Ashcroft's face. Original schematics, hand-drawn in Amara's unmistakable style. Development logs covered in her annotations. Lab notebooks with dated entries documenting every polymer test, every algorithmic iteration, every breakthrough and failure across 9 months of creation. Email threads between Amara and material suppliers. Patent drafts, the originals, with her name as sole inventor, before someone revised them. Every erased fingerprint, restored. Every stolen signature, returned. 6 years of invisible history, suddenly projected on walls 30 feet high for 300 witnesses to see. Victor pushed through the crowd toward the front, but he was too late. He was too slow. The story had already changed hands, and there was nothing left to grab. Raphael stepped to the podium with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times, faced rooms full of powerful people and told them things they didn't want to hear. "Good evening. I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but I believe in correcting the record when history has been written by the wrong hand." He paused. Let the silence sharpen. For 6 years, the world has credited one name with revolutionizing sustainable architecture. One face has appeared on every magazine cover. One voice has accepted every award. Tonight, I'd like to introduce you to the woman who actually made all of it possible. He turned to the screens, pointed to a schematic, the original Meridian System framework, dated 6 years and 3 months ago, signed in Amara's handwriting. This is the bioadaptive architectural framework that powers every major project Ashcroft Design Collective has ever built. The Solaris Tower, the Green Home Complex, the hospitals, the community centers, the government buildings. All of it, every wall, every membrane, every breathing facade, was born in this document, created by one person. He extended his hand toward Amara. "Ladies and gentlemen, the true architect of the Meridian System, Amara Delaney." The applause began slowly. A single pair of hands somewhere in the back of the room, then another, then a cluster near the bar, then the journalists, then the architects, then everyone. It built like a wave, 6 years of silence breaking all at once, until the entire ballroom thundered with it. 300 people on their feet, some clapping, some open-mouthed, some wiping their eyes, all of them staring at the woman in emerald who was stepping into the light for the first time in 6 years. Amara walked to the podium. Her steps were steady. Her hands were still. She stood behind the microphone, and for a long moment, she simply looked out at the room, at the chandeliers, at the screens showing her work, at the faces of strangers who were seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it reached every corner. "I didn't come here tonight for revenge. I want to be very clear about that. I didn't come for vindication or payback or to watch anyone fall." She paused. "I came because I spent 6 years being invisible inside my own creation, and I decided that was long enough." The room was utterly silent. The Meridian System was born from a simple belief that structures don't have to fight their environment. They can listen to it. They can breathe with it. They can adapt. I used to think that was just architecture, but standing here tonight, I realize it's also a philosophy for life. She looked toward the back of the room, not at Victor specifically, at the space where he stood. When someone takes your work and puts their name on it, you have a choice. You can burn everything down. You can scream until your voice breaks. Or you can trust that the truth has a longer memory than any lie, and build something of your own while you wait for the world to catch up. She turned back to the room. To anyone watching this, or listening, or standing in a room right now where someone else is getting credit for what you built, your work remembers you. Even when the world forgets, even when the person you loved forgets, the work knows who made it, and eventually, it speaks your name. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 3 minutes. People were crying. Journalists were recording. Architects who had spent their careers quoting Victor Ashcroft were rethinking everything they thought they knew. In the back of the room, Victor stood alone. Genevieve had stepped away from him. Not dramatically, quietly, the way you step away from something you suddenly realize isn't what you were told it was. She stood 3 feet to his left, her, champagne untouched, her eyes wide with the slow, nauseating realization that the man she married might not be the man she thought she knew. Victor held his crystal award in his right hand. It felt different now, not heavy with accomplishment, heavy with evidence, a trophy engraved with the wrong name. He looked at the screens, at Amara's schematics, at her handwriting, the same handwriting that had once filled notebooks on their shared desk, that had once left love notes on the coffee maker, that had once sketched the future on the back of a grocery receipt at 2 a.m. And for the first time in 6 years, Victor Ashcroft understood what he'd actually lost. Not a company, not credit, not control. Her, the woman who'd looked at a broken radiator and a filthy window and seen the future of architecture. The woman who'd handed him the most valuable thing she'd ever created and asked for nothing but to stand beside him while the world discovered it. The woman who'd loved him so completely that she'd believed his lies not because she was naive, but because she couldn't imagine someone she loved being that cruel. He'd lost her, and he'd lost her not through a single dramatic betrayal, but through 1,000 small choices to put his name where hers should have been. 1,000 quiet thefts, 1,000 moments where he could have said we and chose I instead. His award felt hollow. His applause-filled evening felt hollow. His entire empire, every gleaming tower, every magazine cover, every accolade, felt like a beautiful building with no foundation. And on that stage, bathed in golden light, Amara smiled. Not the guarded smile she'd worn like armor for 6 years. Not the polite, measured expression she'd learned to maintain in rooms where her contributions were credited to someone else. A real smile. Open, unguarded, radiant, the kind of smile that rebuilds everything. Raphael leaned toward her, close enough that only she could hear. The world is about to learn your name, Miss Delaney. And they will never forget it. She looked at him, this man who'd crossed oceans of industry and influence not to acquire her talent, but to acknowledge it. Not to own her brilliance, but to return it to her in front of the world. Thank you, she said, for seeing me. The work made you impossible to miss, he replied. I just followed the evidence to its source. Below the stage, her phone had already begun vibrating. Messages from architecture firms, from universities, from media outlets and international developers and design councils on 3 continents. The world was waking up to a name it had never been allowed to hear, and it was hungry for more. Amara Delaney had spent 6 years in silence. She would spend the rest of her life in her own light, and somewhere in the back of a ballroom that bore the name of her stolen creation, Victor Ashcroft set down his crystal award on an empty table, turned toward the door, and walked out of a story that had never truly been his to begin with. Let me leave you with this. The most dangerous lie in the world isn't the one someone tells about you. It's the one someone tells about themselves, using your work, your sacrifice, your brilliance as the script. Because eventually, every lie meets a truth it can't outlast. And when that moment comes, it doesn't matter how many awards are on the shelf or how many people believe the fiction. The truth doesn't need an invitation. It always finds its way into the room. If someone has ever taken credit for what you built, know this. Your work carries your fingerprints in places no one can erase. Be patient. Be precise. And never, ever let anyone convince you that your name doesn't belong on the thing you created. Now, if this story moved you, if it made you think about someone who deserves to be recognized for what they've built, share this video. Send it to them. Let them hear it. And if you're new here, welcome to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White. Every story we tell is designed to remind you that justice, love, and truth always find a way. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to fight to get credit for something you created? I want to hear your story. Because your story matters. It always has. Until next time.